Cool. Wednesday, which means exit slip. Whoop, whoop. Students will be able to analyze the Declaration of Rights of Man and evaluate which Enlightenment philosophers influenced it most. Cool. Cool exit slip. Love this quote. This is from a pamphlet that circulated in France prior to the French Revolution. It reads, what is the third estate? Everything. What has it been up to this point? Nothing. What does it desire to be? To be something. Very short, but very potent. So let's see what it's talking about. This should look a little bit familiar. We've talked about the social hierarchy in France when we talked about King Louis XIV. Now, some 100 and something years have passed since Louis XIV. He is long dead. His successor, Louis XV, is also dead, and now we have a new king, Louis XVI, who we'll talk about in a second. But just to remind you of the social hierarchy, at the very top, it is members of the church, people who work for the church, the clergy. Underneath them, it's the very, very, very wealthy people of France, the landowners, the landlords, the nobility of France. And below that, it is everybody else, everyone from doctors and lawyers all the way down to the poorest citizens in France. And this is called the estates, the three estates, right? And we are going to start to see France start to have some problems. So France was a part of the American Revolution. It comes in at the very end to help the United States beat England. And because of that, they're going to start to have a lot of problems. One, the Enlightenment ideas that affected America and stars or traveling around the world, they start to make their way to France, and people are like, yeah, we should have democracy like America does, right? Like they fought their revolution. We're just like them. Like, who are they? If they can have a revolution, we can have a revolution. We can overthrow our monarchy just the same way they did. They're also broke. Remember, France, Louis XIV, Louis XV ran France like their own piggy bank, building huge palaces and spending it on whatever they wanted and luxuries and wars and everything. And by the year 1788, we're going to have a very bad summer. There's going to be food shortages in France, and people are starting to starve. And because of that, you're going to see the social inequality between the different estates be at its widest. Remember, the first and the second estate did not pay their taxes, or didn't have to pay taxes. No, didn't pay the taxes. Didn't have to pay taxes. So the third estate, not only were they starving, but they were also having to pay more and more taxes as France was becoming more and more broke. And that's where things are going to get messy, because Louis XIV kept things very tight. He was a very strong leader. He kept things under wraps. He was the quintessential example of an absolute monarch, spending money on whatever he wanted, whether it was luxuries or wars. The current king is not so great. Louis XVI is kind of an oaf. He also is an absolute monarch, also spends the money willy-nilly, but he's not a very good leader. He's a very weak leader. And to make matters worse for him, he has a very expensive and foreign wife, a lady by the name of Marie Antoinette of Austria. So things are going to get messy for Louis XVI and his wife and his family. So what ends up happening is that Louis XVI, because of the debt, because of the food shortages, calls a meeting of all the estates, and they all go to Versailles to meet. And they eventually come to a vote of sorts, where the first and the second estate kind of outvote the third estate 2-1, as it always worked out. It was always the first and the second estate, the clergy, the church, and the landowners outvoting the commoners. And because of this, the third estate gets really tight. They get really upset, and they lock themselves in the tennis court, and they say, we are not coming out until something happens. And they think and they think and they think, and they basically create a new government in this tennis court. And they call it the National Assembly. They're like, screw the king. We're not going to have a king anymore. We're going to have this new government. It's going to be based on democracy, just like America's doing. We're going to limit the king's power, just like England does with their king. We're not going to have an absolute monarch anymore. And they write something called the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. We're actually going to read it, and I'll show you it right now. I'll show you it right now. Just hold on 2 seconds, and I'll show you it right now. I gave you the most boiled down version I had. That way you weren't overwhelmed, but this is what they came up with. So this is a key document in the French Revolution, which is going to be starting with this event, the locking of themselves in in the tennis court. And we're going to see what this new government, the National Assembly, strives to do. What are their goals? This is essentially what their goals are. And we're going to see how this plays out in coming lessons. Next. Nope, that's it. Cool. So the work today is to read the Declaration of Rights of Man, which is these 8 sentences essentially, and then to answer based on the Enlightenment philosophers from 2 lessons ago, from Monday, which Enlightenment philosopher influenced the Declaration of Rights of Man the most. So think about what those guys preached, what their main tenets, what their main ideas were, and then you're going to pick which one of those guys do you see here the most, which of these philosophers. Cool. Have fun with it, and I'll see you tomorrow.